Welcome to the Cheating and Love Tales channel. Death is a funny thing, isn't it? I never expected it to feature so prominently in my thoughts, lurking behind each passing day, as though waiting for a moment of weakness. My father died young. My grandfather, too. I sometimes wondered if I'd join them early. Lately, that question has taken on an unexpected flavor. Now, it's not my own death that haunts me, but the death of everything I once trusted. Have you ever felt your stomach twist, as if a knife carved circles inside it? That was me, on the night I first heard the voice on the answering machine. It was late, I was tired from a long day at the office, and all I wanted was a cold beer before bed. Then I heard him, some man, speaking in a low, ragged murmur that sounded like he'd just finished something primal, something intimate. My wife's name spilled out of his lips like a confession. He said she was amazing, said it with this breathless tone that made the hair on my neck stand up. And I just stood there, in the dark hallway, blinking at the phone. I replayed it. And again. And a third time. By the fourth, I realized I was trembling. It wasn't fear. More like the onset of madness. When Sarah, my wife, got home later, she drifted in like a ghost and mumbled a greeting. I'd asked her, "Were you out with a friend?" She answered yes. Her voice was as even as a surgeon's scalpel. I remember thinking, she's lying. But then I told myself I must be paranoid. I'm Michael Tate, the guy who always tried to see the best in people. So I said nothing about the message. I kept quiet. Meanwhile, my mind raced. I should have confronted her right there, pressed for answers like an interrogator in a TV crime drama. I can still see that image of me grabbing her by the shoulders, demanding the truth, pressing until she admitted everything. But that's not what happened. Instead, I was calm, calmer than I'd ever been. That calmness terrified me more than any outburst would have. We had dinner in silence. Then we slept in the same bed, though I didn't sleep at all. My eyes were wide open, staring into the darkness, hearing that man's voice echoing in my head. She was amazing. The next morning, I re-listened to the recording. The hush in the background. His panting. The little moan that sounded so satisfied. It was so intimate it made my skin crawl, like overhearing something sacred that wasn't meant for me. I remember wondering if it was all a mistake, a wrong number, maybe. Some cosmic coincidence. Because how else could my wife, Sarah, the woman I believed to be kind and nurturing, the mother of our child, be involved with a stranger who left such a message? It didn't make sense. I rationalized. She's always been faithful. We had our ups and downs, sure, but we were stable, right? Right? The unraveling began when I found a locket in her purse the following week. A cheap piece of jewelry, shaped like a teardrop, with an inscription in sloppy cursive on the inside. You were worth the wait. That was the moment a stone formed in my chest. I confronted her in the kitchen, with the same eerie composure I'd had before. "Sarah," I said, as if in an interrogation, "whose locket is this?" She froze. "Where did you get that?" "It was in your purse," I said, voice low. "Answer me." Her eyes darted around the kitchen. She wet her lips. Then came the half-confession. "It's just from a friend." "What kind of friend?" I pressed. "Man or woman?" She fell silent. That silence hit me like a punch, right under my ribs. You know how your lungs feel empty when you're winded? That's how I felt. She tried to talk, but I stopped her with a raised hand. I managed to say, "That message on the machine. Did you hear it?" A flicker of panic crossed her face, then disappeared. "What message?" I laughed. But it wasn't a normal laugh. It was a guttural, humorless rasp. Black humor is what they call it. I guess, the kind that emerges when your world is coming apart. The one praising your performance, I said, my lips barely moving. He sounded real impressed. "Michael, this isn't the time." "Sure it is," I snapped, though my tone remained oddly controlled. "It's exactly the time. Right here, right now. Because if I walk away, I might never ask again. And then we'll live with this invisible wedge until it kills us. She took a step back, tears forming. I'm sorry, she whispered. It just happened. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton. I wanted to scream, to break something. I wanted to fling the locket at her feet and watch it shatter. Instead, I only said, "How long?" She looked at me with such guilt it seared my soul. A few weeks. I recall a bizarre wave of relief. Only a few weeks. Not months. Not years. In that moment, my mind twisted into black humor again. I almost joked, "Well, that's not so bad," but my tongue was glued to the roof of my mouth. Instead, I turned, marched out the door, and drove away. I drove for hours. I ended up at a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, where the neon sign blinked a faint red. Maybe death found me that night, in the form of betrayal. Or maybe something else died inside me. I'm still not sure, but one thing was clear. From that point on, I was changed. A few days passed in a blur. I hardly slept, hardly ate. The phone rang a dozen times a day. Sarah trying to reach me. I wouldn't answer. I drank more than I ever had. Cheap whiskey in dingy bars with sticky floors. I started telling tall tales to strangers, as if searching for some new identity in the smoky gloom. Meanwhile, that voice on the answering machine looped in my head. Finally, the rational part of me decided that I needed proof. Real proof that this was more than a drunken fling. Proof that my entire life hadn't been a lie. "See, we have a son. His name is Ryan, and he's 5. He was the one stable point in all this chaos. If not for him, I might have left everything behind and never come back." Something told me I had to be absolutely sure, so I arranged a DNA test. Don't ask me how I got Ryan's sample. I'm not proud of the methods. Let's just say I waited until Sarah took him to a friend's place, and I found an old hairbrush. Then I did the same for mine. I remember standing in my living room, the test kit instructions trembling in my grip, heart pounding as if I were about to commit a crime. Maybe in a sense, I was betraying my wife's trust further. But I had to know. The test results took a week, 7 days of madness. I drank more, lost track of hours. I would go to our old apartment sometimes, just to stand outside the door like a shadow. I saw Sarah's silhouette once, passing by the window. She looked worried, tired, but not frantic. That calm of hers, Jesus, it grated on me like sandpaper on raw skin. When the envelope finally arrived, it was as if the universe paused. I tore it open with unsteady fingers, and I stared at the words. Probability of paternity, 0%. My vision blurred. I felt a hollow laugh pushing up from my gut. That black humor again. Isn't that something, I thought. I'm not even the father. Guilty heartbreak smothered me like a blanket of wet snow. This boy I'd raised, taught to ride a bike, read bedtime stories to, wasn't biologically mine. Now I understood the phone message completely. She'd been seeing someone else, or maybe multiple someones, for who knows how long. The timeline hardly mattered. The betrayal was real. I texted Sarah a single line. "Ryan isn't mine. Don't lie. I have proof." She called me within seconds, but I let it ring. Then came a flurry of messages. "We need to talk. It's not what you think. I'm sorry. Please come home." I stared at those words on the screen, half laughing, half crying, stuck in that no man's land between fury and heartbreak. That was the day something inside me snapped. I pictured a thin wire in my mind, coiled tight with tension, suddenly breaking with a hiss. I didn't go home. Instead, I spent another night in that motel, staring at the ceiling with a bottle of whiskey at my side. "You said you loved me," I muttered to the walls. "But you gave birth to another man's child. And you let me raise him, feed him, love him, without a clue." My own voice sounded detached, as if it came from someone else's throat. That night, the black humor took over. I remember chuckling, then full-on laughing at the absurdity of it all. I'm the biggest fool in the world. I announced to the flickering light bulb. She must think I'm so damn gullible. Maybe I was. But what frightened me more was the realization that I still loved Ryan, no matter what the test said. And that guilt for loving him, maybe even for needing him, ate me alive. In my twisted logic, it felt like I was betraying myself for continuing to care. Eventually, I returned home, if only to talk. Sarah was there, waiting in the living room. The curtains were closed. The entire space was silent except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Ryan wasn't present. She'd dropped him off at a friend's. Good. At least he wouldn't witness this confrontation. I stood by the door, crossing my arms. "Is he Athens?" I asked, voice level, like a detective collecting facts. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Tell me," I pressed. "I don't know," she said at last, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, most likely, yes. This time, I did lose my calm. I slammed my fist against the wall, the impact stinging my knuckles. "How long have you been lying to me?" I demanded, my words clipping out like bullets. "How long?" Her eyes flickered with anguish, but her voice was steady. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen. I never planned to." "Planned?" I snarled in a low hiss. "You talk about this like it's an appointment you forgot to cancel." My breathing sounded ragged. "He left a message on our phone, praising you like some prize. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was to hear?" She dropped her gaze to the floor. "Michael, please," she whispered. "I'm ashamed. I wish I could take it back." For a moment, the only sound was my heavy breathing. Then I forced myself to a calmer place, feeling that cold, detached spirit rising in me again. "I see," I said. "Well, too late for that." We stared at each other in mutual silence. Outside, a car drove by, headlights sweeping across our closed curtains. I felt like I was in some cheap film noir. The betrayed husband, the unfaithful wife, the darkness pressing in. I left without another word. No grand speech, no dramatic door slam. Just a quiet exit, as though I were leaving behind a corpse. Weeks dragged on, each day heavier than the last. Sarah tried to reach me, text me, email me. I mostly ignored her. But Ryan, God, how could I ignore him? I started visiting him on weekends. The arrangement was unspoken. I'd call Sarah, confirm that he'd be home, show up with a bag of groceries or a new toy, and spend a few hours with him in the living room, under her watchful, silent gaze. She barely spoke during these visits, kept her eyes downcast. I resented her for that calm, that quiet guilt that she wore like a well-tailored coat. It made me feel like the villain. But I also couldn't stand to hear her talk, so I guess it was better she said nothing. Meanwhile, Ryan called me Daddy with the same bright smile he always had. Every time he did, a raw ache twisted inside me. Half joy, half despair. My nights were lonely. I found an apartment in another part of the city. The place was small, the walls thin, and the couch squeaked. But it was mine. I wrote "Here ends everything" on the bedroom wall with chalk one night, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I wanted to remind myself that the life I knew was over. Some men turned to new relationships, others to religion. I turned to whiskey and self-loathing. Then came the revenge. It started small. I created a fake account on a parenting forum, posted about a certain intern who seduced married women. Word spread. I leaked some photos I'd found on Sarah's social media, pictures from a party where Ethan, the lover, had his arm around her, his hand brushing her waist. The images weren't scandalous by themselves, but the context was obvious. The forum turned into a firing squad of insults directed at the homewrecker. People can be vicious online. It was mesmerizing to watch. I'd read those comments. "What a rat. He deserves to be fired. Shameless jerk." And feel this twisted warmth in my chest, like I'd found a secret way to strike back. At first, it even felt good. But it didn't last. That warmth quickly turned into a scorching guilt. Late at night, I stared at my computer, reading the vitriol piling up against him. Some users threatened to notify his employer. Others speculated about his personal life with savage glee. I knew I was fueling a fire that could destroy him. A part of me wanted that. Another part of me remembered that my own family was already in ruins. Was I just dragging more people down to my level? Sarah eventually found out. I'm not sure how. She never confronted me, never asked if I was behind the posts. But her eyes looked bruised with sorrow the next time I came to see Ryan. She knew, and I think she even understood why. We barely exchanged words. Everything was said in how she wouldn't meet my gaze, and how I refused to ask about her well-being. The black humor in me whispered, "Congratulations, Michael. You've become the monster you never wanted to be." One evening, Ryan curled up beside me on the couch while cartoons played. He told me about his day at press school, how he painted a picture of his spaceship with a dog inside. His tiny hand held mine. That warm, trusting grip did me in. I realized I didn't give a damn whose DNA ran in his veins. He was still mine, in all the ways that mattered. My chest ached with a fierce, conflicting devotion, both love and heartbreak intertwined. I asked Sarah if I could put Ryan to bed that night. She nodded, stepping aside. He brushed his teeth, donned his pajamas, and I tucked him in. "Daddy," he said, voice drowsy. "Are you gonna stay here tonight?" My throat constricted. "Not tonight, buddy. I have a place I need to be." "Okay," he said, yawning. "Maybe tomorrow." I forced a smile. "Sure, kiddo. Maybe tomorrow." Then I flicked off the light. Before I left, he mumbled, "I love you," half asleep. I stood there in the doorway, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. Hate and love, guilt and longing, despair and reluctant hope, all swirling in me like a storm. Downstairs, Sarah was waiting, arms folded. I braced myself for an argument, but none came. Instead, she spoke in a near whisper, as though terrified of waking Ryan. "You can stay," she offered. I shook my head. "No, not tonight." She gave a tiny nod, and I saw tears in her eyes, reflecting mine. We parted without another word. Outside, the autumn air bit at my skin, but it felt less bitter than before. It took weeks, maybe months, if I'm honest, to find some semblance of normalcy. I accepted that Sarah and I were done, at least in the romantic sense. The divorce papers were being processed. She didn't contest my request for occasional visitation. In some ways, we both just let it happen, drifting toward the inevitable. My job was surprisingly steady through it all. Perhaps burying myself in work was my way to cope. Late nights at the office, weekends playing catch-up on campaigns. The mechanical nature of tasks dulled the noise in my brain. But one Sunday, about a month before the official divorce hearing, I found myself in a different part of town. By chance, or maybe by some subconscious drive, I ended up outside an apartment building that looked eerily familiar. I realized this was where Ethan lived. I gleaned the address from an email Sarah once wrote, though I hadn't come here intentionally. Or so I told myself. On a twisted impulse, I parked and marched up to the door, half hoping he'd answer. I pictured some dramatic showdown, fists thrown. But the buzzer was broken, and no one let me in. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, feeling ridiculous. Then I turned around and left without seeing him. A part of me wanted closure, another part wanted to avoid it. I guess the latter one. Time, they say, heals. But that's a lie. Time doesn't heal. It erases. It sands down the sharp edges until the memory is just a dull ache you can't quite define. It's like a carved name on a tombstone slowly weathering into illegibility. Even so, the scars remain. On the day the divorce was finalized, I sat in a coffee shop, sipping black coffee that tasted burnt. The lawyer's final email confirmed everything. Joint custody arrangements for Ryan, plus official dissolution of the marriage. Just like that, Sarah Tate and I were no longer husband and wife. We'd broken what I once vowed to protect. I stared at the swirling steam rising from the cup, thinking about how ephemeral everything is. I recalled my father's funeral, the hushed voices, the smell of flowers, the closed coffin. Death again. It's always there, in the corners, waiting for its moment. I signed the documents, emailed them back, and watched the barista wipe down the counters. Life went on around me, unaffected. A numbness settled over me, a calm acceptance. Michael Tate, you're on your own now. If I had any illusions left about fairy tale endings, they died there in that coffee shop, along with the last flicker of hope that Sarah and I might mend. I got up, left a tip, and walked out. The sky was gray, the wind picking up. The city felt both familiar and alien, as if I'd stepped into a parallel world. I found my new car, an old sedan I'd bought after the separation, and drove to my apartment. That night, I found a new bottle of whiskey waiting in my cabinet, as if it had grown legs. But I only drank one glass. The thirst for oblivion had dulled. Perhaps I was tired of running. I suppose the real climax came months later, though it felt anticlimactic. I'd been living in a small rental house near the outskirts of Seattle, a step up from the old apartment. My marketing job was stable, and I'd been seeing Ryan sporadically, doing my best to stay involved. Sarah and I communicated mostly by texts about schedules, parent-teacher meetings, or doctor's visits. We were polite. Strangers, almost. One day, a friend told me Ethan had left his job under suspicious circumstances, something about the scandal on social media that someone, no one knew it was me, had orchestrated. He'd apparently lost a promotion, maybe even gotten blacklisted in certain circles. The news gave me a hollow sense of triumph, quickly followed by shame. Because I knew I'd done that to him. Maybe he deserved it, but maybe I'd gone too far. Either way, it changed nothing. My marriage was over, my life turned upside down, and Ryan was the only tether left to the old me. I'd stand in my living room sometimes, looking at the chalk scribble, "Here ends everything" on the wall, thinking of repainting. But I kept it there like a cautionary sign. Then came the final confrontation with Sarah that I never anticipated. It was a weekend I had Ryan. I took him to the park. He raced around the playground, bright-eyed, laughing. I tried to smile, but an odd sadness weighed on me. Occasionally, I saw couples with kids who looked so secure, so together. I tried not to resent them. When I returned Ryan to Sarah's place, she opened the door, expression neutral. "Thanks," she said softly. "He have a good time?" I nodded. Ryan squeezed my hand before running inside. I heard him babble excitedly about the swing set, and my chest tightened. Then Sarah stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She looked me in the eye for the first time in a while. "Can we talk?" I shrugged. "I guess so." She led me down the porch steps onto the sidewalk. We stood beside the rose bushes she planted years ago. The buds were wilting, petals scattered along the walkway. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she began, voice controlled, but quivering at the edges, "for everything. I never meant to destroy us, or to hurt you the way I did." I listened, arms folded. The calm rage in me was mostly gone, replaced by a dull ache. "So why did you do it?" I asked, just as if I were interrogating a suspect. What was missing? She took a shaky breath. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "We got so busy, so wrapped up in routine. And I felt lost. I was stupid. I messed up everything." I looked away, staring at the roses. "Yeah," I said after a long pause. "You did." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I know it's too late, but I'm sorry, Michael. I really am. I hope one day you can, not forgive me, but maybe understand." My chest felt tight again, but there was no more anger left to unleash. I nodded. "We have to figure out how to be parents, you know," I said. Because Ryan deserves better than this. She swallowed. Yes, he does. That was all. No dramatic meltdown. No shouting. We parted with a kind of weary acceptance. In my car, I sat for a while, feeling the weight of time. Time doesn't heal. It erases. The memory of our marriage was already blurring, the laughter we once shared replaced by the hush of heartbreak. I could almost see it fading, like old photographs left in the sun. The official revenge portion of the story might seem mild. I didn't put sugar in her gas tank or smash Ethan's windows. I never beat him to a pulp in an alley. But I did wage war online, fueling that forum's hatred until it spilled over into his real life. Was it satisfying? At first, yes. In the end, it was just sad. Like dumping poison in a well, only to realize you have to drink from it too. My last direct contact with Ethan happened by accident. It was in the grocery store parking lot. I recognized him from a distance, tall, athletic, pacing near a silver SUV. He turned and saw me. Our eyes locked. My heart thudded. I recalled the voice from the machine, praising my wife. My breath caught. Then he gave a barely perceptible nod, like a half apology or half challenge. I stared back, face impassive. We didn't speak. Just two men in a silent duel, no words necessary. We both turned and walked away. That was all. In that moment, I felt a surprising rush of pity for him. Maybe we both lost something in this mess. Then I pushed that thought aside and drove off, determined never to see him again. Months turned into a year. I relocated again, this time to a quieter neighborhood, still in Seattle, but far enough to feel fresh. I found a better job in marketing at a mid-sized firm. They were impressed by my portfolio, ignoring the rumors that I'd once had a meltdown. Life was stable, if not exactly fulfilling. Ryan visited on weekends and some holidays. He still called me Dad. Each time, I felt that same mixture of pride and sorrow. But I never showed him the sorrow. I tried to keep our time playful, meaningful. We'd go to the park, the aquarium, ball games. He'd ask why Mommy couldn't come, and I'd just say we lived separately now, but we both loved him. He accepted it more gracefully than I expected. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. One evening, after returning Ryan to Sarah, I lingered on the porch. She came out, crossing her arms over her sweater. The tension was gone from her posture, replaced by a resigned calm. I managed a faint smile. "He's happy," I said. "He's doing okay in school." She nodded. "He's doing well. Loves painting." We shared an awkward moment of small talk, about kindergarten, about his new teacher, about the local library reading program. Then I offered a polite goodbye and left. It felt normal, almost heartbreakingly so. We'd become co-parents with a cordial distance between us. No more late-night arguments, no more swirling accusations. Everything had been reduced to a single necessity, Ryan's well-being. On the drive home, I tried to recall the first time Sarah and I kissed. The memory was hazy. That's how time erases things. The once vivid images blur until you're left with the outline of a shape or the echo of a sound. Part of me was grateful for that. It made the pain less sharp. A few weeks later, I sold the old phone machine. I'd kept it in a box, half thinking I'd want that piece of evidence forever. But I realized I didn't need it anymore. Let the voice fade. Let it evaporate. The story was carved into my memory anyway. I also wiped the forum threads, deleting my fake account. A symbolic gesture, perhaps. The damage was done, but at least I could remove my fingerprints. There was a certain cold comfort in that. Time doesn't heal. It erases. If I let enough time pass, maybe even my bitterness would vanish. Or so I told myself. I started seeing a therapist, a middle-aged man with a patient smile, and a bookshelf of psychology tomes. The first session was awkward. I sat there, arms crossed, tossing out half-truths. But over time, I opened up about the betrayal, the guilt, the black humor that had consumed me. The therapist nodded, listened, occasionally offered gentle insight. It helped. Little by little, I found a path to acceptance. Not forgiveness, just acceptance. The final confrontation, my personal moment of closure, arrived unexpectedly. I was cleaning out a closet, preparing to repaint the bedroom, when I found the chalk scrawl on the wall. Here ends everything. The letters were jagged, smudged at the corners. I stood there, rag in hand, a bucket of soapy water at my feet, staring at the words. I tried to remember the exact night I wrote them. Maybe it was the night I discovered the truth about Ryan, or the night the test results came. I wasn't sure. The memory was hazy. And that's when it hit me. I didn't want those words on my wall anymore. I didn't want them overshadowing my new life. So I dipped the rag in the bucket and started scrubbing. The chalk smeared, dissolving into watery streaks. My arm moved in steady circles, methodically erasing each letter. It felt like scrubbing a tombstone, wiping away the name carved in it. When I finished, the wall was damp and discolored, but the words were gone. There was a faint echo of them, but it would vanish once I repainted. I slumped to the floor, leaning back against the now blank space. Sweat dripped down my forehead. Strangely, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a burden I'd been hauling for too long. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it. Sarah had texted me. Ryan wants to know if you can come to his school play next week. He's a tree. I smiled, a small, genuine smile, and typed back, yes, I'll be there. Then I set the phone aside and closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill me. In that silence, I felt no trace of the old fury or bitterness, just a hollow acceptance of the past and a cautious hope for the future. Maybe that was enough for a man like me. Days later, I stood in the elementary school's multipurpose room, watching Ryan, dressed in a cardboard cutout of a tree trunk, stand on stage with other kids, reciting lines about seasons changing. Sarah was in the audience too, a few rows ahead, leaning forward, smiling. The scene felt normal, almost comforting. I held a cheap camcorder in my hand, capturing the moment. Pride warmed me as I saw Ryan wave enthusiastically. He might not share my blood, but he shared my heart. After the performance, I congratulated him, ruffling his hair, ignoring the little pang in my chest that said, he's not really your son. Because in every way that counted, he was. Sarah stood by, holding his coat. We exchanged a polite greeting, the awkwardness replaced by a mutual understanding that we were there for him, not for ourselves. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he'd drifted out of the picture, or maybe he'd never truly been in it. That evening, when I drove home alone, I allowed myself a final moment of black humor. Death is a funny thing, isn't it? I muttered, because I realized something had died. My marriage, my illusions, my old identity as a husband. And yet, life went on. I was alive. Ryan was alive. Even Sarah was alive, forging ahead in her own guilt and remorse. That's what time does. It doesn't heal the wound. It just wears it down until you forget how sharp it was to begin with. Now, I live in a different neighborhood, with my own routines. I get up, drink coffee, go to work. Some weekends, I take Ryan to a ball game or a museum. We eat hot dogs, laugh at silly things. He's older now, starting to notice differences between me and other dads. Sometimes he asks complicated questions about why I don't live with mommy. I answer as best I can, with a gentle honesty. Sarah and I remain polite. We're not friends, but we're not enemies. We coexist in the space that divorced parents often occupy, tethered by a child who doesn't deserve our grudges. Ethan might still be out there, but he no longer factors into my daily thoughts. I can't say I've forgiven him or her entirely, but I've stopped letting the grudge run my life. Occasionally, I feel that old pang, especially at night, recalling the message on the machine, the smug satisfaction in that unknown man's voice. She was amazing. A part of me will always hate that memory, hate the image of Sarah in his arms. but I'm done letting it define me. Death remains a constant thought, but in a different way now. I think about how we all bury parts of ourselves. Trust, innocence, illusions, and how that's a kind of death too. Yet we wake up each morning and continue, despite the losses, because life demands forward motion, even when you don't want to give it. I wrote this story because someone asked me once, "How did you get here?" And I realized I had no simple answer. It's not the story of a hero triumphing over adversity. It's a story of a man who was betrayed, who learned to betray in return, and who came out the other side with scars he'll always carry. Maybe that's as close to a resolution as we ever get in real life. If you're expecting a fairy tale ending, you won't find one here. I'm not riding off into the sunset with a new love or a mended heart. Instead, I'm simply standing in my kitchen, a half-finished cup of coffee on the counter, the sound of traffic outside, Ryan's giggle on my phone's voice message, a reminder to call them back and confirm our weekend plans, Sarah's polite text about a school fundraiser. That's my new normal. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And so, in a strange way, I've made peace with death, the death of my marriage, of my illusions. I've let time erase the worst of the pain. There's still a faint mark where the wound was, but it's bearable now, like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. Some might say that's not much of an ending, but when you've walked through betrayal, heartbreak, and a revenge that left everyone bleeding, maybe that's enough of a final. So that's the last confession I have to offer. I'm still here, still breathing, still carrying on. That might not be a triumphant victory, but it's victory enough for me. Because sometimes, the greatest act of defiance is simply living, and not letting the ghosts of what died haunt you forever. I close my eyes and wait for the sting to fade. I wait for the next day, the next quiet moment with Ryan, the next uneasy nod from Sarah, and the hush that follows. Death is a funny thing, but life, in all its raw imperfection, is funnier still. If I listen closely, I almost hear it laughing with me.